on today's StoryBeat.
January 6th, I was up in the inauguration tower filming the breaking of the police line. I'm not going to trust the feds or the protesters / rioters to tell me what happened. And so I saw them streaming into the building. And I had a moment where I was like, well, guess I got to go in there because that's what I've been doing this whole time. And I ended up on the other side of the house doors where the sergeant at arms had their guns drawn.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, the journalist Richie McGinniss, has always craved action. As a reporter, he's found it, and a lot more, in the chaos of the streets, embedding himself with protesters to cover the most divisive and violent demonstrations in American history. Richie may be a media professional of the new era, posting his intense, on-the-ground videos on social media, but he brings an old-school newsman's credibility from his extensive professional experience and globe-trotting life story. Richie studied Arabic and Middle Eastern history at Georgetown University and subsequently traveled to Jordan, Turkey, Israel, Lebanon, and Egypt's Tahrir Square less than a month before it became the flashpoint for the widespread protests and revolutions that erupted during the Arab Spring. Richie has worked at the Al-Jazeera program Min Washington, broadcasting to households in Arabic throughout the Middle East, as a production assistant at NBC News' Washington Bureau, and as the video director at Daily Caller, where he built a team of 10 video producers. While covering the demonstrations in Kenosha, Wisconsin, sparked by the police shooting of Jacob Blake, Richie witnessed Kyle Rittenhouse shoot Joseph Rosenbaum and nearly got shot himself when a bullet ricocheted near his foot. Richie was plunged into the national spotlight and praised for his clear, non-biased, neutral reporting of the violence. On the ground for January 6, 2021, for the riot at the U.S. Capitol, Richie not only got closer to the action than virtually any other journalist, but emerged with a nuanced understanding of how news events can be interpreted and manufactured by the media. Richie recently published his book, Riot Diet, One Man's Ride Through America in Chaos. I've read Riot Diet and can tell you it's a powerful series of reports from some of the most infamous protest riots of our times, though definitely not for the faint of heart. I highly recommend Richie's book to anyone interested in an insider's look at some of the people covering those events and how those incidents unfold. So for all those reasons and many more, it's my distinct privilege to welcome the journalist Richie McGinniss to StoryBeat today. Richie, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I don't know. Journalist is kind of a pejorative these days, so I'm still getting comfortable with it, but we can roll with that.
Well, what would you call yourself? Would you call yourself a documentarian, a social media influencer, reporter?
I like the Hunter S. Thompson quote, when the going gets hard, the professionals get weird. Something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Well, Hunter S. Thompson said a whole lot of things, and he was a Gonzo reporter. That was his moniker, you know? And do you think of yourself as a Gonzo reporter too?
Yeah, I can go with Gonzo reporter. I prefer that over journalist. I think, the Gonzo approach is rather than, I think every reporter in this day and age tries to tell you, hey, I'm telling you the objective truth of who's right and who's wrong. And the Gonzos just said, hey, here's what I experienced. I'll give you a subjective lens into how I experienced it. And that, in my view, gives you a better understanding of the reality of the situation than if I were to just say, here's who's right and here's who's wrong.
Well, I assume you try to play it straight. You're not trying to slant it toward one political viewpoint or another, are you?
Yeah, it's same as covering the riots. My approach was always put the footage on the internet and let the audience decide for themselves. I certainly put opinion in the book because, as I put in the intro, that's just more fun. And also to elucidate, why I aimed my camera where I did, how I reacted to these situations. But it's definitely getting rarer by the day to have somebody at least, not throwing their hat in one camp or the other.
Well, there's no question it's all become political somewhat When I was a kid, it was all, you could turn on any of the three major networks and you would get the exact same news, sort of read a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Today, you're getting this wide division of how people see the news and what they call their truth, which is very interesting to me, though scary sometimes.
Yeah.
How old were you when you first started looking at the world through the lens of, I want to be the person that reports back what's happening in the world? How old were you? Were you a kid?
I was in 6th grade on 9/11/2001, and the subsequent Iraqi invasion really changed my future. It's the reason why I decided to study Arabic, but also watching the invasion of Iraq. If you remember, CNN and MSNBC were just as for the war as Fox News. And it really informed me on how, number one, the press really determines where the country goes. And number two, they're supposed to be the ones who hold the powerful to account. And in that particular case, in my estimation, they didn't do that. And there was horrible repercussions that I witnessed when I traveled to the Middle East. And I decided I wanted to try my best to fix it.
What were the repercussions you experienced that caused you to want to fix it?
Well, I visited a bunch of refugee camps when I stayed in Amman, Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking with the Iraqi refugees, I was able to put a human face on the suffering that took place there. And then also, the editor of my book, Anthony Swafford, who wrote Jarhead, was a Jarhead. And he was in the first Gulf War. And then my boss at Daily Caller was also a Jarhead, and he was in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so speaking with veterans and the Iraqi refugees, really, it just solidified the human toll that war took on real people. And, it's really easy to sit in a studio and say, hey, we should go to war. But when you see that kind of suffering up close, it's a much different perspective.
Well, there are very few wars where there isn't a lot of human suffering.
Mhm.
That we know.
Yeah.
If you use the word war, it usually implies somebody's going to get hurt, if not a whole lot of somebody's. At what point did you start to use a camera? How did you get good at that? You're mostly a video reporter.
Mm-hmm. I actually took a darkroom class in 4th grade. So I was always interested in cameras and photography. And I took film for 4 years in high school. And I thought I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I was gravitated towards news because it's kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's reality. And like I said, it has a very real world impact, the way that stories are reported on. So yeah, I've always been interested in taking photos, but the video with a cell phone, once I was working at NBC News, which is a cable news outlet, and I felt like I was working in a candle factory right as electricity got invented. So I went to the digital side.
You don't do the typical news reporters thing of coming out with a big tripod and a big camera and a lot of sound equipment and all this stuff. You just use your phone, right?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm doing like a sit down interview, yeah, I'll get the camera set up and the lights and whatnot. But within the context of these protests, the cell phone affords you an ability to not only blend in, but also if you stick a big camera in somebody's face, then I think that they're less likely to give you the unvarnished truth. Whereas if you just have a cell phone, you're like, hey, what's up, man? Can I ask you what's up? What's going on? Why are you here?
Because everybody has a cell phone in their hand, don't they?
Exactly.
So you just look like just another guy in the street rather than somebody special.
Yeah. And usually I'm dressing up like they are. So, the idea is just to blend in. And then I do tell them, hey, can we do an interview? I'm going to film this. Is that cool? And then when they say yes, yeah, then just grip it and rip it.
Well, your book is filled with images. You've put lots of pictures in there, and there's lots of pictures of you in various, what I would call dicey circumstances. You live a life that I have no relationship to whatsoever. And we're going to get into that a little bit because I don't understand how you do it, but that's a whole other thing. We'll get to that.
Much to the chagrin of my mom.
No doubt. I'm sure your mom is probably panicked every time you go out into the world.
Yeah. She makes me wear a helmet most times.
Well, lots of pictures of you wearing a helmet.
Yep.
And goggles and face mask and covering and all that stuff. And even then you still get the heck beat out of you sometimes.
Yes, that's correct.
Whatever possessed you to want to do that?
I'm the middle of 3 boys. So, and I'm a surfer, hockey player. So I grew up with a fair bit of chaos, I think it's safe to say. And when the protests and riots started in 2020, actually my business that I spent years building went out the window because when the pandemic hit, we were all about on the ground reporting and, man on the street stuff and in-person interviews. And nobody wants to watch a bunch of 20-somethings who are on my video team do interviews about COVID from their shoddy apartments. So our revenue went out the window. But when the protests started, it was very clear that being nimble and using a cell phone would allow us to get content that these big corporate media outlets with their huge fancy cameras weren't getting. So I really just, once we started, I just had to continue on because there was nobody else really doing that.
Well, most of the time when you see news coverage of big events like the ones you cover, the reporters are off at a distance. You're in the middle of it.
Yeah. And that was always the goal, which is, I'm not going to trust the police or the protesters to give me an unvarnished view of what's going on. So kind of have to put yourself in the middle of that to really show people what it's like in the belly of the beast. And took some billy clubs, some tear gas canisters, and plenty of pepper balls and rubber bullets.
How many times have you been pepper sprayed? Do you know?
Oh, in the hundreds.
In the hundreds?
I think it was probably 50 on January 6th alone.
Has that affected your health in any way?
Probably. I quit smoking, so I'm feeling better. I got pepper sprayed as a publicity stunt to sell books recently, and I realized that I'm not as young as I used to be.
No, that's what happens as you get older, and it's not as much fun.
Well, my associate, she really stepped into it, so I wasn't expecting her to get that close with the pepper spray. You can hear the Secret Service guys laughing in the video too. They were right in front of the White House.
I'm sure they were getting a big thrill out of you getting pepper sprayed.
Yeah.
Do you think of yourself as I don't know what the right word would be, adventure seeker, thrill seeker, adrenaline junkie? Do you think of yourself that way?
I wouldn't say adrenaline junkie. I would definitely say, I grew up traveling the world surfing and, going off ski jumps and getting hit with hockey pucks. So I think that's just kind of the normal for me. I would.
You were taking ski jumps and getting hit with hockey pucks at the same time?
Not at the same time, but yeah, usually within a couple of days of each other. And my hockey coach was always mad because I was always getting hurt on the slopes. But
what do you think being a surfer and surfing in that world? And I know you write in the book about a couple incidents in which surfing almost got you.
Yeah.
So what do you think surfing and or hockey, what do you think they've taught you about being able to react under pressure? Because you are under pressure all the time.
Well, I think, hockey is a very human endeavor. So you're playing against a team and you have a team. So I definitely learned, that when you're in the trenches with your hockey boys, you got to look after each other. And I definitely took that mentality to the streets with my video team. I was charged with keeping them safe. I was the one who ended up putting myself in harm's way most times. But and surfing it's in the environment and it's you versus Mother Nature. And I think that really forces you to recognize that you're at the mercy of bigger forces at play. And being comfortable with that is a hard thing to wrap your head around. But if you can master it and learn the waves, then you can compete with Mother Nature and actually synergize yourself with it. So yeah, I think it makes you kind of comfortable with the chaos of the world.
Do you think of events that you go to as sort of being like riding the waves where it comes and goes in waves?
Yeah, one of the working titles for the book was Riot Surfer. My brother wanted that one, but definitely just bouncing around, you kind of just go with the flow. And also secondarily, showing up to a protest is a lot like showing up to a surfing lineup in some foreign country. You figure out who the heavy hitter salty locals are, the guys who have been out to a bunch of protests, who the noob, the young groms are who don't really know what they're doing. And, find your way in between and try not to get stepped on.
What did you call them? Young groms?
Yeah, groms is a term. It's a colloquial term for young surfers. Grommet.
Oh, I've never heard that before.
Yeah, groms.
And so when you go to a riot, it almost feels like you're doing a version of surfing.
Yeah, and surfing is very tribal as well. And these protests are all very tribal. It's, this political tribe or that political tribe. And, the salty locals are the ones who run the lineup. And usually what I do is I find where the groms are on the inside, taking waves on the head, because they take the little waves because they're at the lowest part of the pecking order. And then the locals take all the good waves, and you try to find your way in between there, see if you can snag one of the bigger waves on the outside or scoop one off one of the groms because they can't beat you up.
What an interesting way to look at that. That's very fascinating. There have been many, many scholarly works about news events and history and so on. Obviously, you're at that very
Mhm.
first blush of
Yeah.
history when you're on a scene. And there have been many books written by reporters and journalists and so on. How is it that you think that what you've written will stand out? I can tell you what I think, but I'm curious what you think.
Well, I wrote the book. I was told by many publishers that if I wanted to sell books, I had to pick a side, left or right. And I wanted this book to be something that put people in my shoes, whether it's today or 20 years from now. And I didn't write it to appeal to an audience so much as to capture that experience in my own words and not mince my words just to, confirm people's biases. And I think today, if you look at the Trump era, almost every single book that's been written about the topic is colored with he's either Orange Man bad or the greatest guy since sliced bread. And I think it stands out just because I didn't really throw my hat into either of those camps.
Well, I think the way you wrote the book is very straightforward. It's very honest and very from the heart, and you're reporting from the field as it is.
Mhm.
It doesn't have a slant on it other than
my slanted brain.
There's a little fear, there's a little bit of anxiety, there's like, how do I get in this? How do I get out? Do you ever get into the middle of those things and think to yourself, how do I get out of this?
Yeah, definitely. Like January 6th being a prime example, stuck in that Capitol crush when I was in the rotunda, getting forced out.
Oh, you were inside the Capitol.
Oh yeah, because again, I'm not going to trust the feds or the protesters / rioters to tell me what happened. And so I saw them streaming in from, I was up in this is the second book. So the first book covers all the BLM stuff and the second book covers all the MAGA unrest. So that's coming out in a couple months. But I was up without giving too much away, I was up in the inauguration tower filming the breaking of the police line. And I saw them streaming into the building. And I had a moment where I was like, well, guess I got to go in there because that's what I've been doing this whole time. And, I'm not going to trust either of those two parties to tell me what happened. So I went in. I ended up on the other side of the house doors where the sergeant at arms had their guns drawn. Thought I was going to get caught in the crossfire yet again. The cops peeled us off the doors and I was forced out into the Capitol Rotunda. And just to encapsulate the roller coaster ride of that day, my most viral clip of the day was a video of a guy smoking a joint under the rotunda.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, it was the same as the BLM stuff, which is you had people who were genuinely trying to agitate police and trying to break down the doors and stop the processions that were going on behind the doors. And then you also had people who decided just to take the moment to smoke a joint.
And do other things. I mean, there was all kinds of reports from stuff in there.
Oh, yeah.
Did you wind up being arrested?
I did not. I had congressional press credentials, so technically I was allowed to be there.
Uh-huh.
I was allowed into the Capitol, even if there wasn't a riot going on. But, I served my role as a journalist, and I certainly got pepper sprayed, but I wasn't, I got bumped by the cops because I was so well dressed. I had a gas mask, a bulletproof helmet, a bulletproof backpack, and a bulletproof vest. This is like 6 months into the unrest. So my first thought when I showed up was, why am I better prepared than most of these cops? So they thought that I was an agitator just because of how well prepared I was.
I want to get into the preparation in a bit, but I want to continue on this line for a moment. So one of your things is that you embed with protesters. I mean, that's the word you use, embedded.
Mm-hmm.
How does one go about embedding with people who are, clearly not sanctioned by anyone? They're out doing their thing.
Well, it's similar to going to a surfing lineup or traveling to a foreign country, speaking Arabic or speaking Spanish. It's like you learn how they talk, how they walk, and you throw on the same clothes as them and just kind of get in there and say, hey, what's up? Why are you guys out here? And I think the most important aspect of elucidating their version of why they're there, telling me and the public what in their own mind they're doing there, you have to gain some trust. And so in order to do that, you have to talk the talk and walk the walk.
Well, do they know you're there to be reporting on them, or do they think that you're one of them?
Well, it's usually like you talk to them for a little bit. That's why in the book I outline my Riot not only my attire, but also my little toolkit of
Hmm.
at the BLM stuff, I brought White Claws and joints, and at the MAGA stuff, I would bring Budweisers and cigarettes. But that's a way of saying, hey, like, let's just crack a cold one and talk about it. And I think that's, elemental to gaining somebody's trust. And if you're trying to get the unvarnished truth out of them, then if you stick a big camera in their face, or if you're, you know, speaking like a reporter and saying, hey, why are you out here right now? They're going to put their kind of like interview hat on instead of just talking to you like a human being.
You go in, and I'll use this term loosely, but you're the cool dude in the crowd, not the straight uptight guy with the press credentials.
Exactly. And not that I'm the coolest guy, but I definitely, try to just express to them that I at least understand why they're there. I do think that the overwhelming majority of people that I talk to, whether on the left or the right, were out there with good intentions. What happens when the pepper spray comes out is a different story. But if you wear this big press on your chest, also people are immediately going to ask, where do you work? And that's a very dangerous thing in certain situations if they find out, that you work at an outlet that they don't like.
Hmm.
And so, just with the cell phone and no affiliation to the press, it's just like, hey, I'm just a dude with a cell phone here.
Is my memory failing me, or are there not pictures in the book of you with press on the back of your jacket?
Nope, never wore press. No, not once.
Maybe I was thinking there's somebody else in the picture that has press on them.
Yeah, there were plenty of people who did have press on there. Julio was one guy who I was out with, and we all have our own different styles of how to go. But I always view it as I'd rather be at the mercy of police, thinking that I'm one of the protesters / rioters, rather than I had actually a situation in June of 2020, which I wrote about in the book, where a guy with a big camera got too close to a flag that was burning, and a bunch of people saw him filming it, and they told him to delete the footage, and he refused, and he got sucker punched in the back of the head. And it was like, I've seen concussions, and that was about as bad as it gets.
I think if I remember right, you've been concussed as well.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely. I don't know how many screws have been knocked loose, but I guess I can still write good, kind of good.
Okay, so don't take this the wrong way. I think you had a screw loose before you started doing this.
Oh yeah. I came out of the womb breech, so that's butt first into the world. So it's been like that for a while.
You instantly began to see the world sideways, didn't you?
Yes, it's correct, and also being sandwiched in between an older and a younger brother.
How important is it, do you think, that you do have that ability to see the world from a different perspective than, let's say, the average bear?
Well, going back to being a middle brother, from the moment I can remember, I was either the older brother who knows everything, showing the younger brother the ropes, or the younger brother who's following the coattails of the older brother and hoping they take you on their adventures. And so from the moment that I can remember, I've always had one role or the other, either the older brother or the younger brother. And I think when it comes to reporting, you have to, take on a different mentality. It's like a defense attorney will argue for a man that they know is guilty because they're doing their job, or a surgeon, an average person isn't going to cut somebody open, but a surgeon takes on that role. And so I think, reporters definitely, there's a certain amount of detachment that you have to take from your own opinions in order to do the job properly, in my opinion.
Well, great lead to a question, which is, how do you stay detached when all hell is breaking loose around you?
Well, I try. I think actually after Kenosha, after witnessing Kyle Rittenhouse shoot Joseph Rosenbaum, I became very acutely aware of not only my role as a journalist, but also as a witness. And that really forced me to be very open with my role in that situation, which is I'm here to say what I saw, and injecting my opinion won't add anything because that's not my role in that situation. So I think that after Kenosha, it really solidified that in order to do my job properly, I have to take a certain amount of detachment from the emotions of the moment. And in fact, the most critical moments after Kenosha and after January 6th, I got thrown into the news cycle, and people took my statements out of context, and I got really emotional. But it was always my boss, Jeff, who's a jarhead, who's a tough guy, or my family and friends who'd say, "Hey, calm down. Let's go through the proper channels. Let's figure this out. Don't get up too emotional here."
Well, okay. So now I'm imagining you're in the middle of, just craziness. It's the fog of war, essentially. You're in the middle of a battle, and you're also trying to remain somewhat unemotional and detached so you can do this reporting. Is there a mental technique that you go through to stay there? How do you, because I would be running the other way. You're running into
I definitely did some running. I definitely did plenty of running, some near muggings there along the way. But I think, I'm a very emotional person just generally. And like I said, I think.
So how does an emotional person remain unemotional?
Well, that's a great question. And I don't think that I always did the best job of remaining unemotional, but I had Shelby Talcott, who was my coworker at the time. She's a very unemotional person. And my dad, who set an example, he was an ER doctor. And so I really just kind of would try to embody their ethos in those situations. And I think the best way to move forth in a proper way is to take it from example. And so, yeah, I just use the people around me for support.
So let's take it from the beginning of how this happened. You somehow get word that there's going to be an event. People are protesting. There's likely to be a riot that breaks out. You go to a specific location, whether it's Portland or Kenosha or Washington, wherever it is. What do you do as you're preparing to go? What do you take with you? What do you prep? Do you do research? What do you do?
Yeah, definitely do research, especially, most of these protests happen because of a police involved shooting or an election. And if you're going to ask the proper questions when you're out there, you have to know why the people are, at least why they think they're there.
Yeah.
And so definitely that's just cursory research, but then also secondarily understanding who the people are that are on the ground. And that's why I put a lot of history in the book, because I think understanding a place like Wisconsin, people have a totally different view on the world and on what America should be than in New York or in DC or in any of these coastal cities. And so you kind of have to understand not only why the people are out there, but who the people are.
And do you do that mostly on the internet or in any other way?
I definitely was like reading books while I was the history of all these different places. And that's more just for like personal enjoyment, but also, yeah. So I was in all these like Telegram chats with like the hardcore lefty protesters or the Proud Boys. And so viewing those chats on these encrypted applications like Telegram or Signal, you get an idea for how those people think. And when they're talking to each other, that's really where you get the best, most unvarnished version of what their view is.
Do you ever read stuff that makes you a little on the anxious side that you're going to go meet up with some of these people?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Especially, in both cases, on the left and the right, just to see the anger that's palpable in these chats. And also, like in Seattle, in Chaz, which was like a 6-block area that the police ceded to the protesters, we filmed the Proud Boys beat the crap out of this guy. And two of the guys were on probation. And so we got effectively our footage when we published it revealed that these guys were violating their probation, not only for assaulting somebody, but also because they left the state that they were supposed to be in. And so, the Proud Boys did not like us after that. And it's a scary thing. Those are a lot of big dudes in that group. And so I was always looking over my shoulder, worried that they would recognize me. Yeah, there was some hairy situations that I won't give away to the reader in the second book where got cornered by some Proud Boys at a protest. But
well, I know you got shot at least once with the Kyle Rittenhouse event, but have you been shot at other times?
Other than pepper balls? Nope. Other than skeet shooting? No, I haven't been shot at. No.
So when you prep, you already talked about wearing bulletproof backpack and bulletproof vest and so on. What do you physically take with you that's a standard kit for you?
So I need my nicotine pouches to keep me calm.
Nicotine pouches.
It's
interesting that was your very first thing.
Yeah, that's essential. And then during the riots, I actually didn't smoke cigarettes, but I did during the riots. And I've given that up despite my raspy voice. So I had those with me, and I had the suds as a peace offering that I would bring out. And then I would dress up the way that they dressed. So I'd be wearing, all black if I was going to a BLM thing, or even a Black Lives Matter shirt like I was wearing on the night in Kenosha. And, I'd wear like khakis and usually like a dark hoodie if I was going to the MAGA stuff, because there's always counter protesters. So I would want to blend in with both groups. So I would wear something that was kind of neutral for both sides. But other than that, nothing really. A bulletproof vest once I almost got shot, and then I decided it was maybe good to put that on.
A good idea.
And running shoes, so you can run away if you need to.
No hard-soled shoes.
No, and I in the book, I made the mistake of wearing fake news flip-flops to one of those riots.
Well, you have a picture of that in the book, and I was going to ask you, how does one wear flip-flops to a riot?
Well, I was running out the door I didn't even honestly think about it. It was the middle of the summer. Those are the shoes that were by the door, and I didn't think things were going to get hairy like they did. So I ended up slipping them off my feet and stashing them in my back pocket. But unfortunately, I lost those flip-flops.
You were barefoot?
Yeah, I was barefoot during the Jackson statue. Yep. Yeah.
You do like to live on the edge. There's no doubt about it.
I got to retire at some point.
Who do you think is usually more of a threat to you being out there, the police or the rioters?
I would say the rioters, just because the police, at least in theory, have a rule book. I mean, granted, in Portland, one cop shot me with a tear gas canister directly. We were supposed to shoot it off the ground to slow the velocity down. He shot me in the arm, and I bent down to pick up my phone. I was live on Facebook, and then he shot me again in the leg directly. So not every cop plays by the rules, but like I said, I would rather get shot with that than sucker punched in the back of the head.
Well, you don't know that isn't his set of rules.
Yeah, well, apparently it is. I'm sure he got a good laugh out of it. The viewers at home who were watching it live didn't realize their camera guy just got blasted, other than the swear words. But
so I've been in the entertainment business my entire life. I've been in show business my entire life, and I've never been even vaguely close to anything like what you do. And so I think to myself, how would I even, if I got caught up in it, how would I get out of it? Do you have escape plans going in, or are you just working it through?
Definitely, I'm always looking for who's surrounding me and who's within punching distance, and, determining whether or not I can get out of there, especially in the cases where somebody comes up and says, "Nice phone, man." Like, okay, that means you're about to mug me. I'm going to get out of here. Yeah, I guess, sometimes I did a much poorer job of staying out of the tough situations than others, but
you were learning. How would you know unless you get into it, right?
Exactly.
There's no school you can go to learn how to be in a riot.
Yeah, and especially no school that you can go to tell you how to respond when you get hit with some pepper spray, because that really activates a fight or flight response that you have to kind of take a deep breath and say, like, okay, I still need to use my thinking part of my brain here.
All right, so now you just said something interesting to me. You were hit by pepper spray and you took a deep breath?
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to take. It depends on where you get the pepper spray. The best thing to do actually is to shoot the snot out of your nose and rub it in your eyes. That's actually because the water makes it burn more because it targets your mucous membranes and it's moisture activated. So like if you sweat 2 days later after getting pepper sprayed, you'll feel the burn. So yeah, the best way to go is just snot in a towel. Snot in a t-shirt if you don't have a towel.
So I know you have an extensive amount of information in the book about your father, who you already brought up. What did he teach you that has held you in good stead under all these extenuating circumstances?
Well, he always was composed in high pressure situations as a byproduct of being a surgeon. So definitely at least tried my best to take a page out of his book. But then also, like in Kenosha, when Rosenbaum got shot in front of me, I had seen my dad save multiple lives just when we were out in public. Just somebody dove into the sandbar or got hit by a car. And at that point, in those kinds of situations, the thinking part of your brain goes completely out the window and it's pure circuitry. So having those experiences growing up just kind of there's no thinking that goes on in that situation. It's pure instinct.
It's doing, not thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like surfing a wave.
Like surfing a wave. You're either going with it or you're in trouble, right?
Yeah, that's why people train, is so that when they get into those situations, I was not trained for that situation, but I had seen my dad do it, and I obviously failed in my efforts to save Joseph Rosenbaum, but I did, jump in and try my best.
Well, yeah, you did something that, reporters typically do not do, and that's get into the middle of the fray. And you did that because a man was hurt.
Yeah. In those kinds of situations, it's like, oh, why did you decide to do that? But like I said, there's no decision making that goes on. With that being said, it was evident from the moment he got shot that I was no longer in filming mode, but I was in help this guy out mode, Good Samaritan mode instead. And yeah, I think, reporters have a tendency to want to be a fly on the wall, which I was in most of those situations. But when something really bad happens, that's obviously priorities change.
And I'm assuming that you've never been in another circumstance in which something that severe has occurred right in front of you, or have you?
I've seen some pretty hairy injuries, but nothing like somebody getting shot at close range with an AR-15.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure. Now, so you're an excellent writer. Your book is very much in your voice, and I could hear your voice as I was reading, which is a wonderful thing. Where did you learn how to write?
It's a good question. I was a history major in college, an Arabic minor, and I've always done a lot of reading, but I hadn't written since college. And so it was like 10, 11 years before I picked up a pen again. I'd been doing video for all those years. And I guess just, I spent a lot of time reading. I'm a big film buff and I love storytelling, but it did take me a lot of time to find my voice. And I think ultimately my decision to publish the book with my own publishing company that I started for the book really actually sharpened my pencil, because I was like, I'm not writing this to sell it to anybody. I'm writing this for me. And that, I think, really forced me to say, okay, how do I write? And ultimately I wanted it to come across as if I'm talking, but there's a certain art to it, I guess. Same as composing a shot, which is like, you want to set the scene, you want to give people an idea of where they're at, and then also you want to establish who you are so that people are willing to trust the narrator and go along for the ride.
Well, it's the old who, what, where, when, why, and how. I mean,
Yeah.
that's in there. Now, are you telling me that in all the time that you were out there in the field, you didn't make notes? I assume you didn't write anything when you were in the middle of it,
No.
But you didn't go back to your home and sit down and write notes?
No, and I didn't even realize that I was going to write a book until after January 6th, because I was one of very few people who had witnessed the breadth of unrest that I did witness. And when I started writing the book, I was really just going through all the footage and writing down the chaos, and it didn't really make any sense at first. And then about a year in, I got put in touch with Anthony Swafford, who's the author of Jarhead. And he's the one who really, number one, helped me clean up the chaos and make some sense of it, but also identify who I am as a writer, and also really encouraged me to put a lot of the personal stuff in there, because if you read Jarhead, there's a lot of very personal stuff. And I think it really gives you a good idea, not only of who the writer is, but also what it was like. Like, it puts you in their shoes. And I think that gives the reader the actual experience of being there.
Well, I think that's what makes your book wonderful, is you are reporting, but the intriguing part about it is that it is from your point of view. It is you telling us what you're going through. You're not actually interviewing people and getting a ton of their points of view or their politics or their feelings. It's about you and your point of view and how you're experiencing it.
Yeah.
So that makes it very compelling when you're reading it, because the reader is able to vicariously live through some of what you went through without the danger.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was the hardest part for me, was if you're going to do that, then you have to put not only your triumphs, but most especially your failures. And that was really difficult for me to, put the situations that I was really vulnerable into writing, because
Why?
Because, especially my dad, he was always very stoic and always presented his best self to the world. And, I think that he imparted that I should always present my best self to the world. With that being said, the exercise of writing the book, I realized that, if I'm going to put the good stuff in there and I'm giving the reader the full experience, then I have to also put the bad stuff in there. And so that was just difficult because it's like, not your brightest moments need to go in there. And there are a lot of dark moments, not only in the first book, but the second one. And some experiences of getting thrown into the news cycle and you don't look so good. And, they say that a person's number one fear is public humiliation and number two is death.
Well, I think that's right. Most people do not want to publicly speak.
Yeah.
That's a gigantic fear for a huge number of people.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I started to teach, I had to overcome a certain amount of that. And then you do it for a little while and it's not such a big deal. I assume you have a similar thing that happened for you when you were literally reporting and being on TV and being interviewed and so on, that you had to overcome a certain amount of it and then it became second nature.
Well, and going on the biggest cable news show at the time within 24 hours of witnessing a shooting.
Was that Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, that was Tucker. And then I did CNN after they took my words out of context from Tucker. They wouldn't have had me on if they hadn't have so egregiously misrepresented what I said. But by the time I was doing the CNN stuff or other news hits after the fact, I was like, well, if I can do it in front of 5 million people after having just witnessed a shooting, this is going to be easy.
Well, I can tell you for fact certain that there's not much in the book that's rosy.
Yeah.
You don't fancy it up so that it seems clean in some way. It feels like you're going through what you're going through.
Yeah. And it wasn't rosy. And I think later on in the story, in the second book, I start to pick up the pieces and emerge a little bit out of the chaos. But yeah, it was a chaotic time, not only because of what was going on in the world, but also in my personal life. I had lost my dad. So yeah, it was a tough time, and I wanted, to get that across to the reader just because.
So many people do not suffer trauma well. You've been through a lot of trauma in different ways, not only the loss of your dad, but the experience which you've experienced out in the world. Do you have a method for helping you get through that trauma or not reliving it or not having PTSD or anything like that?
I do now. It's writing.
Writing.
Yeah.
That's your catharsis.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was holding on to a lot of anger about what happened, not only to the people around me, but also me personally. And I really was able to let go of that once I not only put it in writing, but also made some sense of the madness through writing. So that was very cathartic. And other than that, just some nice waves or a good pickup hockey game. That helps.
Well, I'm very impressed that you did not write for all that time, and yet you're a very good writer.
I appreciate that.
Something was in you already when you got to the book.
I guess so. My mom and my brothers will tell you I've always been a talker. So I guess, and it's not a short book. So
no, it's not a short book.
But I do want to stress to the listeners that it was not an easy process at first. I went through 150 different drafts. I must have printed the first book out. Now with the second book, even Anthony Swafford said, wow, this is so much easier to edit because your writing out of the can is so much better than it was.
Well, you've gone through one book, so now you know what you're doing a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, and maybe in an ideal scenario.
Well, I think writing is a muscle, and the more that you write, the better you get at it, just like anything else. Yeah. And so once you've been through it, I did this, and then you've learned a certain number of, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah, exactly. Make all the mistakes in order to not make them again. Yeah.
That's right. So you think you did 150 drafts?
Oh, yeah.
Or were you being a little hyperbolic?
No. I literally printed out 150 drafts. No joke. I read it 150
impressive.
times. And at a certain point, you get numb to it. So the first book took me basically almost 3 years to finish. And that was really because, I was learning how to write. And I was passing it around to not only Anthony Swafford, I also had a copy editor, KD, who is actually so she's kind of the opposite. She's from San Francisco. She's a bleeding heart liberal. Not that Swafford is overtly conservative, but he is a jarhead. He's kind of a gruff, military type guy. And she's the opposite of that. And I wanted to get the opposite perspective. And it was really helpful to give it to also somebody who didn't know me because they really give you their take without being colored by, because I had originally, my mom was my original editor and my brothers, and they're always kind of, injecting their personal relationship with you into the
Oh,
whole
sure, of
situation.
course.
So yeah, my mom still helps me edit, but definitely it's really helpful to get somebody who just like doesn't even know you at all, and you just throw it in front of them and say, what do you think?
That's the way it should be, because if you only present your work to people who like you, love you, are your friends, they're not going to tell you the honest truth if they think it's not good.
Yeah. Well, my mom is not afraid to tell me what she honestly thinks, but or my brothers for that matter, but almost to a fault. Like my brother will like go out of his way to tell me what's wrong.
Maybe they enjoy it a little too much.
Yeah.
So I noticed that you very cleverly, in each of the chapters, in each of the stories about the different riots, you then take a certain book and quote from it in the various little sub-chapters within each of the chapters. So you have Thomas Paine's Common Sense, the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have the Book of Matthew and the Book of Mark from the Bible. You have Lord of the Flies, The Great Gatsby, The Empire Strikes Back, and Invictus. Why those?
Well, I guess without revealing too much to ruin it for the reader,
You're not going to ruin it.
Yeah, well, I was just very cognizant of the fact while I was out there that everybody's kind of writing their own story, especially in this day and age. Everybody has a megaphone with their cell phone and the internet. And not only like I chose those stories because they're uniquely American stories. And actually, so the first book is essentially, I mean, it's not a critique, but I'm certainly looking in on the BLM protests and giving my understanding of it and what it means. So I used those books and stories with male, masculine protagonists and writers. And then in the second book, I use all feminine protagonists and writers because I view the first book as like kind of a masculine critique on the left. And then the second book is, I actually talk about my dad a lot in the first book. And then I talk about my mom in the second book. Like Swafford was like, where's your mom? I want more of your mom in there. I was like, I left her out of it on purpose because I put her in the second book. And, it's a feminine critique on the ogre daddy Trump, to put it simply.
The quotes are wonderful. Did you need rights to any of those quotes?
No, I didn't need rights to the quotes. Only because, it's excerpt and then there's a requisite amount of commentary involved. But I did spend a lot of time thinking about those quotes and trying to choose. I mean, I read each of those books a couple times before I put them in there. But also, I was thinking of Lord of the Flies constantly when I was in Seattle. And that's the book that I used for that chapter because it really was Lord of the Flies type situation.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, like a Great Gatsby, obviously that's for the New York chapter. I chose Empire Strikes Back because they played the Imperial Death March every time the Feds came out. And I was reading Great Gatsby when I was up in New York. I like to read books that are, from the region that when I'm visiting it, like if I'm traveling in a foreign country, I'll try to read, Gabriel Garcia Marquez if I'm in Colombia or whatever. So, and I was thinking of Star Wars when I was in Portland because they were playing the Imperial Death March. And then I did think of Invictus because that was the poem that I read to my dad when he was sick. And when I was going through a tough time myself, I touched on that poem a lot.
Thank you for explaining that because that makes it even clearer. Because you don't explain why you're using these quotes. The quotes they're attached to these chapters and they enhance what you're about to talk about at the top of a chapter, but that makes it even clearer. So thank you for saying that. Did you have, when you were writing the book, now you say that you took no notes that whole time. So you were looking back at your video footage and then figuring out what it is you were going to say from those experiences. Did you have any eureka moments where you went, holy mackerel, I didn't think of that at the time?
Oh, yeah. Because I watched the videos the second time when I was writing the book, I watched them on an iPad and there were all these different details of like, oh my God, I didn't realize that guy had a gun too. And, I wanted for the book I didn't want to use too much hindsight because I wanted for the reader to understand it as I understood it at the time. But with that being said, I think of like Orwell writing Farewell to Catalonia. It's like this dude was just in a trench with a notebook. And it's so much easier to jog your memory when you have this thousands of videos to go off of. So there's, actually the most difficult thing was like turning that fire hose of video information into something that's, a cognizant thought and storyline.
How long did that take you to do, to go through it all?
I don't even...
Months, I assume.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I went through them over and over again. And I mean, yeah, like I said, the hardest part was making sense of it. But what I did at first was just write down what happened with the details from the video to jog my memory. And then I kind of went in after I wrote that, just the baseline structure of what happened. And then I added in, the context of what the press was saying, what the politicians were saying, what these places were like. And yeah, I mean, it was a very long process. I was not very efficient the first time around.
So I think some, if not all of your book, although I think you could do a series, should be a movie of some kind. Have you thought about that? Have you gone to anybody with this?
Swafford said that he wants to write it, but I haven't yet because I think that it's still too close to home. And like, there's a lot of politics in there. And I think people are so emotionally charged right now that it might take a little bit of time before somebody's willing to put that on screen.
It is fairly recent. Most of what's in the book is fairly recent.
Yeah.
And sometimes what you're doing in the book, what you're writing about in the book, probably needs 20 or 30 years of distance.
But I did, just by virtue of the fact that I was doing video at the time, like I was always thinking of how the shot was composed, and I had a visual way of viewing those situations. So just my memory of how I experienced things had a visual element to it. And so I think that kind of came through in the writing, I guess.
So I'm also curious, the images, again, back that you put into the book, they're all your pictures, correct?
Yeah. Except in the cases where they're not, I put credit. So like if I'm in the photo, Bodie, I use the pseudonyms. Those are all Point Break characters that I used as pseudonyms.
Yes.
Because some of my friends, that I don't blame them for not wanting to be named in the book.
They're not risk takers like you in that way.
No, not all of them. Some of them.
They're risk takers out on the waves.
Yes, Bodie is a risk taker in the waves for sure.
But they don't want to be exposed as someone who's in the middle of your world.
Yeah, like some of my buddies are like, they're like, I'm a lawyer, man. I don't want to be in your book. You can give me a cool Point Break name.
So you didn't need to obtain rights to any of those pictures because they were.
So I did because I was working for the Daily Caller, and technically they owned all the images, but I called it my get shot at retirement package. They gave me a sweet deal on the licensing for the photos. So, and down the road, I'm going to do a digital version that has the videos embedded as well. But
wow,
I'm trying to get the second book done first. But yeah, because I have all those videos, I do want to definitely give the reader the opportunity to watch them if they want to.
But you don't own them.
No, but I'll get a sweetheart deal.
Well, that's a question that I like to ask people that have photos and things like that in a book, because that's an issue for a lot of people that are writing their first book, whatever it is. How do you obtain those rights? In this case, you had an inside track to them.
Yeah, and I got permission from the people who took the photographs. Usually they're just like, yeah, take it. The guy who took the photos, E. Mackey, who took photos of me in Kenosha, I offered to pay him, but he was like, I believe in what you're doing and you can have them for free. For the second book, I bought one image from the Epoch Times. I was watching it. I followed all the surveillance footage because you can go to the Speaker of the House basically opened up these terminals in the Capitol Hill office building where you can go and view the surveillance footage. So I followed myself from Independence Avenue, where I hopped on my skateboard when I got into traffic, and I skateboarded through traffic, and I was rushing down there because I knew something was going on. I didn't think that things were going to pop off until it got dark, like the previous Stop the Steal rallies. But as it turned out, my now wife and girlfriend told me I see cops running around. So I was like, oh, it's on already. So I raced down there and I followed myself going all the way up the inauguration tower, down the inauguration tower. And I actually followed myself all the way through the Capitol, but I climbed a wall to get around. There was like a long line of people going up the stairs of the Western Esplanade there. And there was no line to climb the 20-foot wall. So I climbed up the wall, and that was the one blind spot of the surveillance camera. And so I couldn't find any images of that. And that was kind of like the most ridiculous part of my experience of the day, just as far as what I did. But I was watching a documentary by the Epoch Times, and I was like, what is that? There it is. That's me. That's me going up the wall. And actually my skateboard falls down as I'm climbing over the wall in the footage. So I obtained a screenshot of that for the cover of the second book.
That probably looks to the average viewer as, why is this fool carrying a skateboard up a wall?
Yeah, well, the funniest part about, I mean, there wasn't much that was funny that day,
No.
but the funniest part about that was the fact that my skateboard fell as I was climbing over. This guy was like, "Here we go, brother." And I was so well dressed. He thought I was like, one of the frontline guys helping to break down the doors. But he yanked me up. My skateboard fell. I was like, "All right, there goes the skateboard." And I continued through the conga line, following everybody in. And the same guy tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Here we go, brother." And somebody had grabbed my skateboard from down below, and they fireman passed it back up and gave it back to me. And I didn't
Really?
Yeah. And I ended up losing it. I actually surrendered my skateboard because it was too cumbersome in the Capitol crush. And I actually literally, this is another thing that I found out in the video afterwards. I put it under which painting? The Surrender of General Cornwallis. So I lost that skateboard. It's in an evidence locker somewhere. I got to find it.
Is that somewhere. The singular most extraordinary remembrance you have of that day, or what would be the singular most extraordinary?
The singular most extraordinary was, and this is, again, my mom being incorporated into the second story. January 6th, 2021 was my mom's 69th birthday.
Oh, my.
And I was hanging from the inauguration tower, and she called me on her birthday, and I had to ignore her call.
Oh.
Sorry, Mom. But that was definitely like the memory that stuck out the most.
Wow. And once again, isn't it interesting? It was a personal moment.
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of where you're like, it brings you back into, wait, this is real life. And, these are all real people, because it's so surreal that you almost, you feel like you're in a dream state.
Well, you're the first person I've ever spoken to that was in the middle of that. So I can't imagine how surreal it was. Watching it on TV, which I was doing, was surreal.
Yeah, it was.
Being in the middle of it must have been extraordinary.
I mean, because I'd been in that Capitol Rotunda before, but not with a riot going on, and to hear the screams and the sounds of like what sounded like medieval warfare in that place was really bizarre, for lack of a better word.
I really can't imagine. I mean, I can see video footage of it, but I can't imagine what it was like to be in it. Well, I've been having absolutely one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever had for just shy of an hour now with Richie McGinniss, who's written this fantastic book called Riot Diet. And we're going to wind the show down a little bit. And I'm wondering, in all of these wild experiences you've had, can you share with us a story that is either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny that you haven't already shared with us?
Yeah, okay. I got one. So this week, I think it's appropriate because this week is, for those who don't know, the CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee. It's this big, like, conservative event where Trump is speaking on Saturday. And in 2018, I was at CPAC, just interviewing people who were out there. And I got out of the elevator with my coworker, and Geraldo Rivera was right there. And I was like, "Hey, Geraldo," like as if I knew him. And he turned around like with a smile, like, "Do I know this guy?" And he's kind of looking at me, waiting for me to say something. And I just said, "What's in the vault?" Because Geraldo, for those who don't know, it was the most watched news event in history. He advertised this, "Oh, we're going to go into Al Capone's vault, and what's going to be in there? And what's in the vault?" He would say in all the promos. And I remember this when I was like a little kid. It was like this huge news event, hundreds of millions of people tuned in. And it was like bigger than the Super Bowl. And there was nothing in the vault. And so his smile just goes to a frown, and he just says, "F you." He said some bad things. And my coworker was like, "Why did you do that?" I was like, I don't know. I don't know why I did that, but it was funny.
He didn't try to push you away or anything, did he?
No. We were like 10 feet away, and he just turned and walked away. And he's like, he's like conservatives would be like, kissing the ground that he walks on. But my mom worked in show business ever since I was a kid. She's actually since the 70s. And she always just treated the stars like they were normal people. So I guess maybe I should have treated Geraldo a little better. Sorry, Geraldo.
Well, the stars still have to put their pants on one leg at a time.
Exactly. Yeah.
It took me a long time in Hollywood to understand that they were just people and not somebody that were perfect on a screen.
Yeah. I'll save the second book. I'm not going to give it away, but I did meet Trump in 2015.
Oh,
I don't want to
okay.
give the details, but yeah, you got to tune in for the second one.
All right, well, we'll have to do that. All right, so last question for you today, Richie. You've given out huge amounts of advice throughout this whole show about doing what you do for anyone that might be interested in doing what you do, for sure, and those that might be interested in it just to understand it. What's the best piece of advice that you can give to someone who's maybe starting out, or maybe they're in a tiny bit, but trying to figure out how to get to the next level?
Well, I think like we were talking about earlier about knowing what your role is in a situation, a lot of the kids that I hired in media, especially the younger ones, they think that everybody wants to know their opinion on every topic under the sun. And everybody, I think in this day and age, wants to give like their hot take. And it's more about the response that you elicit than the actual truth of the matter, or any kind of like asking yourself, what is it that's my job here? And so I always would tell these kids, like, stay in your lane. In the protests, our lane was to record the footage and put it up without commentary. They were wearing this, they said that, because that was our lane. And it was a lane that was pretty much unoccupied during that time period. So I think, more so than just like telling the whole world what you think about everything, especially, when I was serving coffee to Rev Al Sharpton, when I was a production assistant at NBC, like my job was to serve that coffee. Actually, he had tea and toast, but that tea had to be hot, and the toast had to be well toasted. And that was my job. And I did it with a smile on my face, not because I liked it, but because I was getting paid $12 an hour, but I was surrounded by all these professionals. And I guess to close that thought is, especially when you're younger, it's not about what you're doing so much as what you're learning. So I wasn't doing something that was glamorous, but I was surrounded by the best professionals in the business, and I learned a lot.
Well, I love hearing that advice, because there's a lot of truth to the notion of, if you're going to do a job and someone is expecting you to do that job, doesn't matter how small or unimportant it may seem, you do it to the very best of your ability.
Exactly. And I get all these, again, with the kids, like they're like, oh, how's my work-life balance at this job? Is it remote? And I'm like, I got out of college and I turned down 10 times the salary to translate Arabic. I turned that down to serve coffee for $12 an hour. And you know what I did? I got a bartending job because I couldn't afford rent if I didn't. So I think, especially when you're young, it's like, take your licks when you can.
Well, you got to figure out what it is you really want to do. And if you're willing to go through whatever the machinations of getting there are. And sometimes it's hard and difficult.
Yeah. And sometimes you got to learn what you don't want to do in order to learn what you do want to do.
Oh, great advice. That's true. You got to sometimes go through it to figure out whether you want it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
That is for sure. What are you off to next? Do you have a riot in plan?
I've been covering a bunch of the protests in DC. I'm in DC. I am going to try not to get myself into any more trouble. I do have the second book that I'm finishing. Then I have a couple other book projects. I have this publishing company that I started. So I do like writing. Eventually I'll combine the video with the writing, and I'll get a channel going, YouTube or something like that. I think they go hand in hand as well, because writing is like a movie in written form, and storytelling is storytelling, whether it's on video, whatever the medium is.
That is for sure. Storytelling is storytelling. It is how we communicate. Richie McGinniss, this has been an absolutely fantastic hour plus on StoryBeat today. And I can't thank you enough for your time, your great interest in the world itself, and for your energy in sharing that with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve. It was a great interview. I wish that everybody in the press was as insightful as you.
Well, I thank you. And I think everybody should go out and get a copy of Riot Diet and check this out. I assume you agree.
I agree. Yeah. Diapers don't buy themselves, so go get a copy.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.